Dave Sinkinson, welcome to Built to Sell Radio.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here.
So tell me about AppArmor. Give me the genesis of how you guys came up with the idea for this business.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically what happened is I was at my alma mater, which I guess is actually somewhat our alma mater. And we were doing I actually had a job there, and we were doing an audit of the sort of blue light emergency poles on campus. And they're kind of like, those emergency points. Someone goes wrong, you press the button, campus security, knows where you are. So basically we did their audit, and we found that a big percentage, about 30% of them were broken for one reason or another. The light bulbs were burnt out, the wiring was shot, whatever. So sort of being in the right place at the right time, I was sitting on a committee and part of my job that was called the Campus Safety Working Group. And I sort of said, well, what if you had an app where you could press a button and it would call campus security, right? Wouldn't that get the job done, at least in the short term, while we deal with this pole problem? And, surprisingly, everybody was like, that's a great idea. And so naturally, I kind of had this, oh shit moment where I turned around and I had to actually produce a product for these people. So I spoke to my business partner, and who's also my brother, Chris, and he's the coder extraordinaire. And he actually built out sort of a proof of concept and worked really closely with them. I think some of those, like the lean startup sort of build, measure, learn stuff, he really built out that MVP with them. And, after a little while, we had sort of a functional product, and it was working on campus, and students liked it, and it started to grow organically, started to get other institutions.
I remember those blue poles, and for folks who may not have had the same college campus experience, I remember when they first installed them. I was in school in like the early 1990s, and there was the No Means No campaign at the time. Mm-hmm. This goes back 30 years ago, so bear with me. But that was what triggered the erection of these blue poles, which were intended for, I think at the time, people walking alone at night who felt like they were unsafe. They could dial or press a button, mm-hmm. and yeah, to your point, campus security would call. But yeah, I felt like they were always broken too. So nothing changed in the interim. Yeah, but your app was designed originally, interesting that students could hold the app on their phone and basically call campus security in the event there was an issue.
Yeah, basically the idea. So a couple of things going on. Like first off is that the app itself, it wasn't like the AppArmor app. It was actually an app that was focused on like the branding and trust cues of the organization we worked with. And this is actually, I think, a very keen differentiator for our business versus our competitors, which was that we weren't one app. We were a bajillion apps. We had created an assembly line for custom branded, so like white labeled mobile applications. And the feature set happened to be predominantly focused on personal safety. So in those early days, the feature was press the button, and at the same time on a web dashboard interface, the campus security people could see the position of the phone that made the emergency call. So it was so cool. It was very effective at what it was supposed to do. But those were really early times in the world of like the app stores. Like the app store was about a year old. We had an app on BlackBerry. So it's like
that dates anybody.
Yeah.
Like before BlackBerry, after BlackBerry, or after BlackBerry, before BlackBerry. Got it. Okay, so that's helpful for sure. So, what was the original business model? Like, how were you planning to make money?
Yeah, so we started out with basically two fees that we would charge an institution. And this is really like B2B enterprise sales that we're talking about here. We didn't charge the consumer anything because we just didn't think that and we were right, by the way, that they wouldn't pay for this sort of thing, especially when you think you're invincible, right? When you're at university or college. So we would charge the institution. We would do one-time fees originally for the setup of the application. And then after that, a sort of a small recurring revenue, and I mean like really small, probably like $3,000 a year or something like that, maybe even less for the original institution. So like very small numbers. Over time, the business shifted. And some of this came from conversations we had with other entrepreneurs who are in public safety as well. Some of them even located in Toronto where we were. And they said, for one thing, you should charge more. And secondly is you should switch it all to recurring. Don't even bother with the one-time fees. Just bake it into the recurring. You'll be better off, and it looks better to your investors or your potential acquirers as we get down that road and all that kind of stuff. So that's how the model shifted. So we would shift to these fees. And then the fee size would be based on the size of the institution. So if we were working with, a 2-year community college with a couple thousand students, yeah, it's going to be a pretty low price, somewhere between $5,000 to $10,000. If we were working with UCLA, NYU, University of Florida, 30, 40, 50,000 per year.
Got it. And were those all customers of yours?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we, at our peak, we had about, before the sale, we had about 350 organizations on the platform. And so I named a couple of the NYU, Princeton, UCLA, Florida State, and in Canada, Queen's University, Dalhousie, UBC. I mean, in Canada, we had 100 of 150 institutions. So we were really dominant in this space.
And so was I correct in what you said earlier and hearing what you said earlier, which was if I was a UCLA student, effectively when I use the app, it would appear as if I was using a UCLA endorsed app. And then when I went to NYU, it would look different. The logo would be different. The color palette would be different. And I'd effectively feel like I was using an NYU app.
That's right. And actually the way it would work is you go into the app stores and you would be a student and you would search for Bruin Safe at UCLA. And it would say Bruin Safe and it would say by University of California, Los Angeles. Like we literally did all the work behind the scenes. We were totally invisible to the actual end user.
Gosh, it must have been so sticky. What were the churn rates like?
Oh, like so low. Way less than 1%. We never especially we might have a customer churn out of maybe a certain module in the app or maybe a supplementary thing that we offered, but never a full logo loss. We were very, very sticky. I mean, SaaS businesses generally are, right? But I think even for us, we were in such a strong position.
Well, did you say 100% logo retention?
Not every single year. I'd be lying if I said I had that every single year, but 99, 98%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. How did you finance this business? What was the model?
Yeah, we bootstrapped, actually. So I guess let's zoom. I know it's crazy, right? Let's just zoom out for a second. So, I got a couple of different thoughts. I have a lot of strong opinions on funding, and I talk about this in our book that comes out, which we can talk about later. But the way we did this business was my brother and I, we actually had a few different side hustles going. So at one point we actually had 5 different products. Most of them were solved by a mobile app doing something. And we're talking teeny revenue, 10, 20 grand, tiny little fun projects. But, when you added them all up, it actually gave us a little bit of a foundation. And we actually had 2 pretty strong ones. One was actually something for the campus bookstores at many universities and colleges. And the other one was AppArmor. And over time, we kind of moved away from that other business. We could see it was sort of declining. Campus bookstores aren't exactly a rising market these days. Whereas the public safety space and the mobile app piece seemed to be going pretty well. So we had a little bit of self-funding. We won a contest at one point for $15,000, but that's it. After that, it was this revolutionary model, which was customer revenue was funding the business.
So literally bootstrap the entire thing.
Yeah.
Wow, good for you. Congratulations. How did you navigate working with your brother? That has got to be one of the most challenging things. Because brothers are competitive, especially so close in age. How did you guys, what was the hardest part? I don't want to hear the Pollyanna story about how wonderful it is, how much you support each other. I want to hear what was the hardest part of building a business with your brother?
Yeah. I'll start with there's a borderline offensive level of candor in a business that you start with your brother. A couple of things worked in our favor. First off was we both had our the same business training. We both went to the same school, and that was good. So we understood that kind of stuff. Where we would fight and where we would come into obvious conflict was usually around things that required more creativity, or we were going with our gut on something. We didn't have enough data. When we didn't have data, we got into fights. We still do, for what it's worth. He's the co-host of my podcast, Startup Different, and the co-author of the book. And we still fight over stuff. He wants things structured a certain way or whatever. He's very detail focused. So that was pretty stressful, and we would have some pretty big fights. What we learned to do was, hey, don't fight in front of the staff. And 2, keep talking. And they say, don't go to bed angry, which I'm not sure is like the best advice for this sort of thing. But it was kind of like, we could go to bed angry, but we'd wake up the next day and come in and go, I don't hold it against you. We kind of like leave it on the field. We could go see each other at family events and it wouldn't be a big deal. So, there were some rules to the engagement.
It can't have been that bad because now you're working together again. Yeah. So there must be something there.
Yeah. I really understand him now and he really understands me. Like it's, you normally, if it was a different co-founder that wasn't like a family member, you'd say that they are becoming your family, or you at least see them more than your family. So in this case, I think we just kind of really get each other. We know where we're going to set each other off and how to kind of avoid those circumstances.
Yeah. So how big did you get this company before you decided to exit? 350 institutions?
Yeah.
Kind of ballpark revenue were you at?
I want to say annual recurring revenue, like that was obviously very stable, around 6.5 million. Pretty rock solid revenue, highly profitable. Again, our cap table is pretty hilarious. It was just Chris and I, right? It was a very, it was a really different kind of business. And when we get talking about the actual sale itself, one of the funniest things was, the company that owned the company that was going to buy us was kind of like, okay, like show us your cap table. And they're like, that's it. And they're like, what about your debt? What about like, what big liens do you have on the business? It's like, no, nothing. It's just profit. And so I think at our peak, we were looking at like 60%, net profit margin. So like
60% net profit margin?
Yeah.
On six. Okay. So I'm doing the math here. So like that's $4 million in profit.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And we would,
wow.
Yeah, so it's software, right? I think like there'll be people listening today who have a business that's much more complicated because they have logistics and materials and their movements and all those other complicated issues. But in the world of software, and this is particularly why I don't like funding for software companies, it's kind of like, but why? You can actually do this. Now, mind you, like I said, we had some revenue to support ourselves, but going out and getting millions of dollars and then being super in debt and, having those investors on top of you and all the pressure that goes with that, you can avoid it. It is possible. It's just a little bit more painful at the start, but it's really great later.
And again, in the beginning, you were able to keep a cash flow positive model, A, because you had a few of these side hustles going. Mm-hmm. B, there was an upfront, charge. You charged the institution in the beginning.
Yeah, right away.
To sort of finance the customization of the app.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, I think actually of your book, Built to Sell, which is one of my faves, by the way. Big fan of Alex Stapleton, I want to say his name is. But for us, I really think that we did charge up front. We treated it like a product right away. But there was definitely a collaborative element of both the sale, like the sale that we would make to the customer, because we could customize the feature set in real time using our content management system for the mobile apps. So that was another powerful tool we had. We could change the buttons. You had a big football game on campus because you're Florida State University and you have 100,000 people coming. That's a big safety concern. Well, guess what? The main screen of your app just got updated to all this information about the football game, where to park, how to be safe, all this important stuff. So it was way beyond that initial feature set of just that panic button. And so it really developed in that way. And that made us very, very potent. But that collaboration to determine what features they wanted, and then also through implementation, that was something that we had project implementation specialists to help execute.
These are like customer success managers who would be assigned to each account?
Like, we actually didn't do customer success that well, I would say. We did customer service unbelievable. Like, we killed when a support ticket came in, we could just deal with that. But when it came to, I would really say we had a project manager, but they also did all the work. Some project managers are kind of like just kind of getting everyone organized. Our project managers did the whole thing with the customer. So, and they were trained on systems that we built very early on in our business. One thing that Chris is really big on is making sure that before you hire someone, before you go down that road, make sure you've got systems in place for those people to be successful. And I couldn't agree with him more, because for one thing, it's way more profitable. And second thing, it's just a lot easier. When you have to manage a lot of staff, all that kind of stuff, it's harder to position your business to be so profitable, to be as easy to, or even as enjoyable, frankly, when you've got to be managing all these people and these processes are kind of loosey-goosey. We had tons of structure in our business.
And how many employees did you have at 6.5 million in revenue?
Yeah, so we at the time of sale, we had a few vacancies, but at the time of sale, we were 16 people, and we had a headcount of about 20.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Amazing. And so like, were you and Chris just like pocketing a couple $1,000,000 a year, or were you reinvesting all that into the business? Like, how were you kind of doing? What were you doing with the all the profits?
Yeah. Awesome question. It depends on the year. So, I mean, like it really ramped up. Basically around 2018, 2019, we were just crushing it. Actually, when the pandemic hit, obviously the pandemic was terrible for lots of way more meaningful reasons that I'm about to bring up. But for us, it was kind of disappointing because we were really doing well and we were really hitting our stride. We had proliferated with new products and that kind of stuff too. And it was at this point that, oh yeah, by the way, that product that you have that keeps people safe when they physically congregate together, may not need that, right? And so that was a really interesting time, which I'll definitely talk about a little bit later. But for the early years, it was all about reinvestment. Now, we didn't increase our salaries or any bonuses or anything like that. We didn't do anything like that for about 4 years, and then after that, yeah, we were pocketing some pretty nice dividends, come year end, and at one point, actually, when we would describe it to Rave as the company that acquired us, what our salaries were like, we would say it was like an NBA player, but like a junior, like an entry level rookie into the NBA level salaries. So it was where we were at.
What was it about the NBA salary, that analogy that you were trying to communicate?
Well, we were trying to be like, hey, we make a lot of money right now. So if you're going to have us do some sort of a transition, which is pretty well table stakes in any acquisition, we'd like to be well compensated for that as well. And to their point, they mostly heard that. I mean, at the same time, they didn't have that much sympathy for us. They paid us a lot of money, obviously, for the company itself. So
yeah, for sure. We'll get there. But I'm now curious. You kind of left a little bit of a breadcrumb or a cliffhanger that I'm curious about, which was, how did you handle COVID when congregating on campus became impossible?
So we were in a really interesting position. Our market effectively evaporated overnight. We were like, I feel like COVID either was amazing for your business or devastating to your business. There was really no in between. And so at first it was in the devastating category. What ended up happening was we had these mobile apps at tons of institutions, and consider as well that on these enterprise buying cycles and having really high retention, it wasn't like they were just immediately cutting the app and being like, we're done with this or whatever, because the app was still branded something safe. Okay, so Bruin safe NYU, whatever. So most of the time anyway. So it turns out that, personal health dovetails into safety in a way that we didn't really understand before COVID that we do understand now. And so there was that piece. So they kind of held on to it for enough time for us to take a deep breath. And all of a sudden our teams were not so busy to go, okay, how are we going to pivot? And this is a true pivot. I get annoyed sometimes at how people throw around the term pivot, but this was a true pivot where we were forced by the market to do something to address this, to just stay relevant. And so what we did is we introduced features around the personal health of end users. And so one thing, I don't know if you recall, but when you'd have to go to like doctor's offices or certain places, you had to fill out a questionnaire beforehand, your self-assessment. And so that was our first getting our toe in the water in terms of understanding, what does this health market look like? And so we built out features. And remember, we have all this infrastructure of all these apps. We can update the content in real time. So we actually added new features to every single app. Of course, they had to pay, but everyone that wanted it, that made it so that people could do these self-assessments. They would get sent to administrators, the appropriate administrators at the school. They could review it. It would flag the ones that for people who said they were feeling ill, and notify them through text messages and messages in the app and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of interesting backend functionality. And so that's where we kind of got into this, and we said, I wonder if there's budget for this. And so then we go back to these institutions, and there wasn't budget for us normally, but all of a sudden, because we had a health thing, there was a lot of budget. Hey, this is something that can keep the buildings open. Amazing. And then after that, and this was the real kicker, and I can go deeper on this in a second, but after that, we did a vaccine verification tool where you could, we didn't realize we were doing anything political, by the way. But anyway, so we called it the vaccine passport. You could scan it and your QR code from the government, or manually input the information for us in Canada. And there was a similar process in certain states in the US. And we could send that information directly to the school, flag it for people that were that they didn't have it in time, or like, they weren't in that waiting period. Remember all those weird rules? And that was incredibly lucrative. That actually, we had the best quarter in the company's history when we introduced that tool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Such a cool story. So, I mean, again, I'm kind of curious personally. You and your brother have built this juggernaut, really super sticky customers, virtually no logo churn. You're pocketing these dividend checks. The worst is behind you. Why sell? Why not hold on to it? Keep it forever.
Yeah, we just didn't like money anymore. No, it was exhaustion. I think first off, we had been at it for a long time. Anyway, at this point, by the time we sold, it was about 10 years. Okay, so it was just like that's a decent chunk of change. Secondly, is the pandemic took a lot out of us. A lot changed in 2019. Might have been late 2018, but 2019 at least. We actually bought office space in downtown Toronto. We built it out. It was beautiful. It was like this amazing thing. And it was so fun to have everybody come into the office. Great vibe, very positive, supportive. And that kind of like went away. And then the expectations really changed too. Like I remember at one point, I had started to signal to the staff, like, hey, we're going to start coming in a couple days a week. And then one of the other variants showed up and just totally torpedoed me anyway. But I remember the staff preparing for the fight. I knew that this was going to be a tough one. So that sucked. That was tough for Chris and I, because we really, really enjoyed going in and seeing everyone. And then that going away was tough. So there was that. And then the last part of my exhaustion was that I also had just had a kid. So there was like a lot happening there. And it seemed like a good opportunity to, hey, maybe we can get some money out of this, and I can spend more time with her and with my wife.
And so what happens next? Do you market the business for sale? Like where'd you go from there?
Yeah. So we have an interesting journey. So we didn't use a banker. We didn't do any of that stuff. We had a really, that's where I think in Built to Sell, where Mr. Stapleton's experience is a little bit different than mine. So basically, rather than shopping it, basically, let me come back a little bit. So going back a couple years, we had an experience where we had another competitor in the market doing some pretty sketchy stuff. They were basically impersonating a company that was like interested in our business. And this is all kind of really sketchy corporate espionage level stuff, where they were basically trying to pick up, like, how are we doing your demos? How do we sell stuff? Whatever. And we caught them, and you'll love this. We caught them, and this is how we found out that it wasn't real. At first, it would seem too fast. They were going through everything really. They signed a legal agreement in a day. That never happens. Okay. But the way we caught them was that we looked them up on the website. Their website looked exactly like another website, and their address was on one of the hidden about us pages. They must have just filled it in when they were filling in the make your own website thing. And so we were like, okay. Anyway, so we happened to email. An interesting moral crisis here is we had a moment where I said, this is messed up. Like, this is wrong. But from a business perspective, you could be like, well, maybe they're going to do it to our other competitors too, right? But what I did instead was I emailed our competitors and I said, heads up, they tried to defraud us. This random website. We don't know if it's part of like that company or what, but we just want to give you a heads up. This is a problem, and see you later. And interestingly, I got a reply back from the organization that would end up buying us a few years later. It was my first interaction with them, was kind of paying it forward, just giving them a heads up on something that was kind of bullshit. That
there was this fraudulent company impersonating campus safety software companies. Yeah. So they came back to you, and did they immediately say, hey, we're interested in acquiring you? Or did they say, hey, thanks for the heads up? And then where did it go from there?
It was thanks for the heads up. A couple of years go by. I'm pretty strategic. I was kind of thinking, well, if we ever want to do that, we need to court some of these strategics. I was always interested in the strategic acquisition. I really wasn't looking for like an investor or like selling half the company or something like that. I really kind of wanted to be all in or all out. And so, time goes forward. We are getting constant emails by, I think, mid 2020 from different private equity groups. From everybody wants to buy a piece of us or buy us outright. And most of the time, we would just ignore it because we didn't know them or it just didn't seem credible. And this is the weird psychology of being a founder. I was like, maybe this is our competitors trying to rattle us and get us off our game. Like I really was so skeptical.
Interesting.
That is until I got 2 different emails, and both of them were from strategics that I could recognize right away. And one of them was the company that bought us. Now, I courted these 2 companies for a while. We would do like a monthly call or quarterly call or something like that. One of them was okay, kind of fizzled out. The other one was obviously the winner. And we had good discussions with them. And that led to them actually, eventually them putting a letter of intent in front of us.
Okay, so when you're having these quarterly calls, what were they under the auspices of? Like, were these just informal calls? Did you say, can you join my advisory board? Or like, how did you kind of contextualize it?
It was sort of kind of weird sometimes, I'm not going to lie. Most of the time, it was kind of this like very tense, kind of like feeling each other out. Like, what are you guys up to in the market these days? And I wasn't colluding. We weren't like, we're going to go into this deal and we're going to charge this much and you're going to charge that much and you're going to win this one, we'll win the next one. It was nothing like that. It was entirely, though, these conversations of, well, what have you guys been up to? And I would say sort of generalized terms, well, we've been growing really well. We introduced a new product line that's been selling well. And, but without giving away the farm, but still kind of being like, here's something that you can take away. And they would kind of reciprocate. They would say, well, we're looking at different companies to buy. We've been looking at, what do you think about, like one thing that comes up, like this never ending thing was like indoor location. Like, can you somehow identify where a person is inside a building? Like which floor, if it's a really big building, that kind of stuff, which by the way, it's super hard. And I don't want to like discount companies out there or future technology, but right now. So it was kind of like this, we just go back and forth. And it was kind of meant to be like, I'm waiting for them to signal to me that they want to see more. And they did. And we did a demo for them and this other vendor, and it felt very academic. Not really. And I got worried. It was kind of like, okay, wait, is this actually like they're interested or are they just trying to really understand how our stuff works? So I had kind of like a cagey high level demo of what we had. It was a very bizarre exercise. Now the experience with Rave and their company that owned them called TCV, which was the sort of the private equity behind them. I believe they were an early investor in Netflix. So they've done exceptionally well for themselves. They were much more sort of direct. We're here because we're interested in buying you. We see you in the market. You've been stepping on our toes, without saying it this way, but you've been stepping on our toes. We find it annoying. We might be interested in buying you out. Let's have a conversation. And that slowly progressed to, you sign your NDA, you start to show them some of your software at a high level, assuming that they've probably seen this through the market, and somehow things happen in the market. And then getting to, before we could get that LOI from them with what they were prepared to offer, we had to give them a sense of our financials. And that was probably the scariest part.
Okay, so I want to get to that. But before I do that, there's 2 strategics that you're sort of courting through this. You show me a little of yours and I'll show you a little bit of mine.
Yep.
They're both, when you say strategics, did they have a campus safety app that competes directly with yours?
Yeah, we competed every day. And it's bizarre, right? Who would have heard of this market? But one of them had been in the game very early. So both of them were actually, their main business was something called mass notifications. So you think of like Amber Alerts or Alert Ready in Canada or mass text messages, emails, all those things. So a year before, actually a few years before, we had proliferated. So the mobile app, our strategy was we have this mobile app and then we're going to go in and try to capture the mass notification piece at these organizations as well, because this is a big deal in public safety. There are these people called emergency managers, and all they do is send out, they don't know all they do, but a big part of what they do is they send out emergency alerts when something happens. Mm-hmm. This seemed like very what our competitors would consider safe territory, like safe market for them. And when we, again, through the market, would just see some of their interfaces and kind of what it did, we're like, we can do that. So and that incredibly generalizes this ridiculously complicated product development process. But we then sold into our existing base and displaced them with our mutual customers that had the mass notification system with company A and our mobile app. We would go in and just take the whole pie. So they started to freak out a little bit.
I'm really intrigued by this, how you shared a little bit without feeling like you were giving away the farm. Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs going through an M&A process for the first time are just petrified of giving too much to an acquirer that they can then turn around and say, you know what, not going to buy your business, but thanks for the information. We're going to take it and compete with you.
Yeah. And I know that's happened to I have entrepreneur friends that's happened to. And so, I mean, some of it, there's kind of this stuff that you just have to have an intuitive feel for how credible the person you're working with, the company you're working with on the other side. These were really big companies that I was talking to. So there is that one piece that I felt a bit more comfortable in that. I would say too, I felt very confident in our business. I thought that people could go out and copy what we were doing almost exactly the same, but we could still win. And it's because it's the way in which you do something is just as important as the product that you put out there as well. The culture, the pieces, like all those kind of like soft pieces. I just felt like, sure, bring it on. You want to try and do something like we're doing? This is our core competency. This is the thing we do really, really well, is that mobile app. And by the way, right, we don't have investors. So if you come into a deal and you're trying to give like really discounted pricing, I'll just beat you. I'll give it away in some cases if I absolutely have to. So like, I was ruthless. I had a moral high ground, but I was like morally ruthless. I would, I'd be willing to go there if I had to. But I was very confident in our business. Maybe overconfident, maybe not. And also in these discussions, I was really careful about what I did and didn't show them. And how.
So what did you show? So you signed the LOI with, the NDA, non-disclosure agreement with Rave.
Yes.
Which is a private equity backed direct competitor.
Yes.
So they've got more money than God. They're, directly competing with you. You've signed an NDA. What level of detail are you sharing with them? Like, are you sharing like obviously revenue, gross margin, net margin? Like, what are you sharing?
Well, it's all sequenced out. So at first, you have your first call is kind of this conversation of like, okay, tell us like orally a bit about what you do and your strategy and like how that's going. Okay, so really high level stuff. It's more just to get a sense of the people on the other side. And you'll also get a sense of their seriousness. And if they start making little comments that kind of trivialize your company, then that that's probably coming from a bad place. They probably, I'm not saying they like you, but they got to respect you.
Did they trivialize you?
No. Actually, I found that we were treated really fairly, really quickly, which I found actually pretty surprising. And I don't know, like it was because I sent them that email years before being like, watch out for that sketchy competitor. But I'm going to hope that it was. I hope that it built like rapport in advance, but at least establishing rapport with them was a pretty quick thing to do.
And who's on the other side? Is it Todd, the CEO of?
Yeah. So Todd Pyatt came in a little bit later. He's the CEO of Rave. At first, it was the private equity group exclusively. And there's a guy in our book, actually, well, he's also in real life, but his name is Gal. And so I refer to him as Good Guy Gal because he was this very trustworthy dude right from the beginning. And he was actually extremely important during the negotiation. But, he would really just set the table and be like, look, we're serious about this. This is what we're here to do. And we could even probe them a little bit, like, why are you here? And I felt that added, their answers were great. So the first part, they were like, well, you're annoying in the market. You're doing something that's displacing their mobile app product we could consistently beat, like consistently. So they were upset about that. And then meanwhile, we're building the tools that they do that they consider safe. So they're starting to think like, a few years down the road, this could be a really big problem potentially for the business. The other thing that he said is that, we own this company. We're obviously private equity. We're probably going to turn this thing around in a couple of years. We think that you can be a part of that, which to me, I hear as, sure, the tech is great and everything, but for private equity, it's all about the money. And I feel like they're like, we want that growth, like that growth engine, that year over year, those percentages are what we're looking for. The other thing too, is at that point, we were named one of the 200 fastest growing companies in Canada, and we were 30th in software. So I think they were looking at us like, great, this is something we can add that makes the whole package we're going to sell in a couple of years look really tight.
Yeah. For sure. So, okay. So you're sharing a little bit of what you guys do. When did the Spectre evaluation come up and how did it come up?
Yeah. So we had it's very logical here. So we had our first call. It was kind of get to know you. Second call, I would start showing them the software a little bit. So that was also like, I wouldn't, not showing them source code. They could really, fundamentally, they could probably call up one of our mutual customers who they really liked and really like them and say, hey, can you show us the AppArmor stuff just for a few minutes? Like, that's the kind of stuff that happens in the market. It's not illegal. It's not wrong. It just happens. And we had customers show us the competitive software all the time.
Sure. Yeah.
And so we understood that was happening too. So then we get to that point, we show them something, and then they kind of go, okay, we like this. This is interesting. They had tech people on the call too and all that stuff. And they said, okay, let's talk, business. Let's talk the money here. And then we had to really sort of put together the financials. And this was basically a PowerPoint deck where we would obfuscate customer names, obfuscate as much as we could, frankly, but still give them a sense financially of where we were at, what our projections looked like, all that kind of stuff. And keep in mind, again, bootstrapped, right? So we didn't have the big spreadsheet, with the 25 different tabs, with all the different scenarios and all this stuff. We were just like, this is where we are. This is where we're hoping to be next year. This is the basis for that. This is why we think that. And so we did show them a little bit. And I think that was our most vulnerable point. Because by that point, we had shown them the software at a high level and the money, even if it was unclear as to like what was our biggest customer and that kind of stuff. So that was probably the biggest risk. But by that point, we had many calls. I trusted them. It felt like it was going the right way. It is what it is.
Yeah. And out of interest, what proportion of your revenue was your largest customer?
That's a great question. Not significant. Maybe 5-6%.
Yeah, single digit percent.
Single digit for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want anybody that can shut the lights off, right? So
right. And so you guys adhered to that.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So you show anonymized customer data in a PowerPoint and a projection. And does good guy gal kind of say, what do you guys want for it?
Oh yeah. No, this is great. This is one of my favorite. I totally forgot about this, John. So we're in the meeting and I'm a sales guy. Sales and marketing, that's where I'm at. I understand in a negotiation, there's like certain things you probably shouldn't do, right? Chris, not so much. He's really excited. Chris has two dreams, okay? He has first dream, starting quarterback of the Buffalo Bills. Okay, so we're working on that one. It's not looking likely at this point.
Yeah, don't hold your breath.
Hey, don't hold your breath. The second one, sell a software company for millions of dollars. So he's really excited. This is peak Chris, basically. And so they say to you, they asked us the question, which I know you never answer, but they say, so what are you looking for to get for this? And Chris, just without skipping a beat, just goes, 20 million. Yeah, 20 million. Yeah, right. Just. And so, 3 days later, guess what we got? Well, we got an offer and it was for $20 million.
Oh my God. Okay.
And
what did you do when he blurts out the number?
I was like, how do I damage control this? Right. So I started thinking to myself, I go, he's going to hate me for bringing up this story. I'm sorry, Chris. I love you, bro. But so basically I start saying, well, yeah, that's our starting point. And, after you get into the numbers and see our technology, sure, you might want to change that. I'm tap dancing as quickly as I can to try and get us something. But yeah, it was pretty fun.
Because I'm doing the math and although $20 million is a massive amount of money, obviously,
yeah.
Given how profitable you were and the growth rate, it's only 5 times profit for a very successful zero churn SaaS company. So you probably knew that was on the lower end of what you could have gotten for it. But
I think Chris got that number in his head, and he was happy with that in the moment. And we actually about a year, not even a year, actually a little bit over a year later, we talked to Todd Pyatt about this. So I was very curious as to because Todd was on that call. I said, Todd, what did you think when Chris said that? And he's like, you must have been kicking him under the table after he said that. I was like, oh yeah.
You know what you should have said at that point? You should have said, hey, Chris, man, I love you, bro. Why don't I just buy you out right now? and then I'll just deal with these rave guys.
Don't worry about it. I'll handle the rest. Get out of here. Yeah.
Here's your 10. Go on your way. Love you, bro. See you at Thanksgiving.
See, I'll see you around. Yeah. See you later. Yeah. Not quite.
Oh God. Okay. So that's hilarious. So Chris blurts out the number, his dream number. And did you at this point have a number in your mind, or did where were you at?
No, I want them to put the number out there. I want them to give me a sense of what they think it's worth, and then I'm going to push them and try and get more. That's just this is just sales. Like that's the way I would do this, And it was a little bit disappointing that happened. What was interesting though, and maybe an important caveat to this whole thing, is that we actually ended up turning them down. So we turned them down for the 20 million. And how often do you get to do that in your life, right?
Yeah. So you did in fact get an offer, an LOI for the 20.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We got the whole Monty, and I'll tell you why we turned it down is a huge earnout. First thing, I thought it was a bit of an unfair earnout. It was, I think, 2 years, which, given our profit and the consistency and reliability of our business, I was like, I don't buy that. So there was that. I thought the number was low because Chris sort of blew it. And actually, we pushed back on the number desperately at this point. We got them up to like 22 or something. But then, here come just strings on strings on strings after that, like how they really were concerned. They didn't like it. They were definitely outside of it. They thought they were right on a deal, right? Like, why wouldn't they? And so there was a lot of limitations there. And then there was kind of this other soft stuff that I didn't really have a good, clear vision on, which was like, what happens to the company? Like, are you keeping all of our staff? Are you shutting down some of the tech, all of the tech, none of the tech? What about like our mission? Like, our mission was about, making people safer. Like, how are we going to like align that? How do we bring this together? And there was very little offered to me in that regard. And I had three principles after this experience, which was, our people, our technology, and our customers. Those were the three things that I was like altruistically very concerned about at all times during any of this acquisition talk. So. Okay.
So you mentioned earnout. I just want to make be clear. So it was so on the 20, the original LOI, mm-hmm. There was so the 20, was that the downstroke, or was that the total valuation of which some of it would have had to have been earned?
Yeah, some of which would have had to have been earned
and
over
what
time.
Proportion was it at risk? Do you remember?
It was material. I don't know, a quarter maybe. It was big. It was. Okay. I didn't like it.
Yeah,
I know I really didn't like it. Right.
Yeah. So maybe it's like roughly 15 million up front with an extra 5 if you can walk on water. And
that sounds about right.
Juggle 6 balls at the same time.
And don't forget too, they still at that point had a kid coming, and so they had all these financial targets, and they're like, yeah, you got to hit all these targets too. And I have no idea how potent we're going to be in the market without them as a competitor, and I have no idea how my life's going to look. That was my first kid, so and it was. It was a good thing we didn't proceed because I was outrageously busy, and basically like, sleep would have been off the table if I had said yes to that deal. So
yeah. Okay, I'm dying to find out what happens next. So they give you the 22 and all this qualitative stuff is still an open question that you don't have an answer to. Did you just say we're out, or like how did you kind of broach it?
We said not now, maybe later. Okay. Now that is nothing. That's air. There's nothing legally binding there. That's it. And, but we took a gamble, and I like to think of it as we sort of bet on ourselves. I think what Rave and TCV were looking for. So we had a very strong 2019, a very strong 2020. But I think they would have liked to have seen, all the years were growth, all years net positive, but I think they wanted to see like 3 consecutive years of really solid double-digit growth that they could take to the bank, a pun intended, not intended. And I feel like they just weren't there yet. So we were like, okay, let's bet on ourselves and let's see if we can shake some of this other stuff too, like these earnouts and, and getting more of it up front, of course, and all that kind of stuff, and more clear positions on what happens to us and our company and all those kinds of important things. So meanwhile, we're mid-pandemic. Okay, so that was 2020. So 2021, we're in the world of Omicron, all that kind of stuff. But we happened to launch our vaccine verification tool, which I alluded to earlier. Yeah. And it was massively successful. And I'll tell you why. Another great book I like is Jim Collins' Good to Great. I think it's Jim Collins. Sure. We had a really high return on luck. So we had all of these customers with these apps that were already doing health-related stuff. And then the governments in a few different jurisdictions. So here in Canada, in Ontario, and in Alberta, and actually in some other places in the States, came out and said, if you have people coming to school, you need to know their vaccination status. Like, hallelujah. We couldn't have been better positioned. We were even like vetted by the IT group for like health related, PHIPAA level certification. Like we were perfect. We were already ready to do this. And so I remember working so hard, incredibly hard. The only time I worked harder was due diligence, but I worked super hard and with my team. We're in the trenches. We're implementing, like I'm talking to customers, which I didn't do implementations at that point, but we were just so busy. I was like, I'm going to take this one because we needed to make this happen. I thought, I'm thinking about the acquisition too. And I remember working on Labor Day, got an email from a Canadian university not far away from here. And they were kind of like, we are totally screwed. Please, we'll pay you whatever you want. Just deploy this thing right now. And so I went and I worked for, I think 4 hours. Dropped it into their app, all set, ready to go. Labor Day, we're good. Like a day later, they were ready to go. It was amazing. We were just so perfectly positioned. So we had the best quarter ever. Did, I want to say like $1.5 million. It was crazy. It was a crazy quarter for us.
Of revenue or no, profit?
That would be top line. Yeah. So, well, profit, that would have been really something. But anyway, so we turned around after that was done and we were kind of rolling into the winter. And it'd been about a year after we'd last spoken to Rave. About 10 months. And so then we emailed good guy Gal. I said, Gal, great news. We absolutely crushed our targets this year. Thanks to this huge thing during the pandemic, which by the way, we were totally forthcoming with them on. We're like, we know might be considered differently, this revenue. But anyway, we hit the targets. We crushed the targets. We think you should reconsider what you were offering us and whatever. And I'm at a gas station in Burlington, Ontario. I'm filling up my Nissan Rogue, making silly faces to my daughter in the back seat. And I get this email and I look at it and it's Gal emailing me back. And he says, oh, this looks great. We're prepared to up our offer to $40 million. And we'd like to set up a call this week. And I was like, holy shit. And about 15 seconds later, my phone rings and Chris calls me and he goes, whoa. And I was like, I guess we're doing this. And that was it.
Chris, how about this time you let me?
Yeah. He knew by that. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So I got to rewind by about 10 months. When you say to Rave Media, the ultimate acquirer, or
Rave
TCV,
Mobile Safety and TCV,
we're out. Like maybe sometime in the future, but 22 and all these questions, just it's not going to work for us. What was the reaction?
Yeah, I think a little bit of shock. I would start with that. I think that, again, remember, Chris gave them the number. So I think they were kind of thinking, well, I thought we were pretty close. And I think there was some disappointment there. Like, I'm not going to say that the relationship was better off because we did that. But I think we tried to be really forthcoming as to why this was happening. And we also tried to leave the door open for later to say, we're still interested in this, but I just think we're too far apart on kind of, what is effectively the most important point, which is the value of the business. And so I think the way we handled that was pretty important. The other thing that, and again, going back to that return on luck just for a second, the other thing that was working really well for us was that Rave was actually struggling a bit in the pandemic. Okay. So if you're the private equity group TCV, you have these targets that Rave needs to hit. They're not quite meeting these targets. They're still selling. They're just not getting to the targets that TCV needs in that. Boy, wouldn't it be nice to have a startup you could acquire that fills that gap and at the same time boosts what looks like your customer acquisition, metrics and all that kind of stuff. And so I think we didn't know that we were doing it sort of perfectly, but they had another bad year. So they had 2 bad years in a row. So they were kind of like, I think they were more interested. So
some external things were also going on for them that made them increase their appetite to do this, as well as the success that you guys enjoyed over that 10 months. Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. So you get this email from Gal and where does it go from there?
Oh, it goes pretty quickly after that. That week we had a call and kind of updated those old financial slides that we had before, showed it and, painting a great picture and where we were at. And so then they were happy with what they were seeing. They updated their LOI and after our conversations. And I think that they, I think this is William Ury, but William Ury's BATNA. So your best alternative to a negotiated agreement.
We had on the show like a month ago.
Yeah. Oh, really? Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
BATNA. It was great. Yeah.
I'll go back and listen. I love listening to him. I heard him on another podcast the other day, but that doesn't matter. But the one thing that's interesting is, so our BATNA was running this incredibly profitable business. Like, yeah, sure, we were tired, but we could have just, I would figure it out. I don't know. I'd drink more coffee or something. But so we felt really strong. And I think they knew that. And then they also were kind of desperate given what had happened in terms of their sales targets and wanting to package Rave, to the extent that I actually even asked Gal again. I said, do you have a firmer timeline on when you're planning on spinning this whole thing out and selling it off? And he said, for us to participate in that, we would need to be acquired within the next few months. So I was kind of like, okay, well, this is the best we're going to get. They really needed to happen. We did really, really well. Everything kind of came together. And so they sent us the updated LOI with a 3-month earnout. Okay. So I was like, cool.
What did you have to do in those 3 months?
Beg your pardon?
What did you have to do in those 3 months?
Oh, just basic. Well, I mean, we knew we would stay on for longer, but the relative commitment there was just help us get the basics over and then give us the keys and get the hell out of here. But I kind of knew, I would talk to them. I'd say, look, I know it says 3 months on paper, but it's mostly, we just don't want to be tied down. Obviously, we'd like to have flexibility. I feel like, frankly, it makes them have to work harder to keep us in the business. So that was important. There was still a percentage that would be paid out a little bit down the road, but it was very small. It was, I want to say like $1 million or something like that.
What was that tied to, that final payment?
It was tied to just a date. It wasn't really called like an earnout, but it had something to do with in the, I can't quite remember entirely, but
sometimes it's like an escrow that they
kind of like that concept.
Like to deal with any potential legal issues that might come up over the transition period.
Like, there's all the reps and warranties you make during the purchase agreement. And I think it had to do with, a set of them basically being fulfilled for a certain amount of time, which was probably related to the technology. I suspect you're right on that. So, but then, so they sent us an awesome looking offer. And then they were more detailed on how the companies would come together and what our roles would be. And so we felt good about it. So we signed it. And that was a weird feeling. And then I was like, well, this is great. Hard part's over. Typical sales guy, right? Yeah, I got the deal done. I'm out of here. I'll see you later. I'm going golfing. And then I worked as harder than I ever have. And that was during the due diligence period. That was
with a young newborn at home.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, it was like Christmas Eve. And I think we had a call with our lawyers at 11:30 p.m. We're talking next level. I didn't think I could work that hard. And I'll tell you why it was particularly tough. And this is another thing that's different. By the way, I love your book. That's why I keep bringing it up. But that's another thing that's different from Built to Sell is that we didn't tell anyone on our team. We could actually keep it just between Chris and I. We're the two co-founders. We understood the entire business. The business could do its own thing. It could operate. It was doing that. We had an executive team, 3 other people that represented the different sort of departments of the company. But we knew that we had to keep this from them. And there's a lot of data behind how, if you tell certain employees and it gets out of control, it can actually really negatively affect the value of the acquisition in a bunch of different ways. So we were all over this. So imagine you're doing due diligence. They have a team of 10 people. Now, mind you, we had lawyers and accountants for sure. We had an army of lawyers and accountants. But after that, it was basically us for any in the business questions. And they had their equivalent representatives on all their different functional areas. Your CRO, your CTO, your CEO, your CFO, all the C's were working with just Chris and I. And we had to give them all this information and package it and do and it was unbelievable. It was absolutely unbelievable. I cannot believe we pulled it off because they also wanted to do the whole deal in 3 months. So it was this incredible push to get it. And we got it there, but it was really, really tough. And
in retrospect, for folks who maybe are about to go through this, as you think back on it now, is there anything you might have done differently? Is there any way you could have lubricated that due diligence process?
Yeah.
What advice would you have for someone about to go through it?
Well, in some areas of the business we did, because again, we had turned them down a year before, so we kind of got like a sneak peek of kind of what they were looking for,
Sure.
and tried to organize our financials a bit more, clean up some old contracts, because they're going to go through literally everything, like absolutely everything, and they're going to be pretty intense about it. So we did take some measures. So whatever you can do in advance to organize your company in a way that's systematic and easy for somebody else to come in and take a look at, you're going to want to do that. But then, there was definitely a big unknown. We just, beyond that sort of base level from outside that NDA process, or the LOI process, we didn't entirely know what they were looking for. So we did try to do some stuff, but at the end of the day, it just kind of ended up being like we were at their mercy to some extent. There was just so much work that we needed to put out there. I would suggest that make sure you're very comfortable with your lawyers, make sure you're very comfortable with your accountants, and ideally they've got, and I can't imagine they wouldn't, but ideally they've got a lot of experience in some of this so they can actually give you an idea of what you would see in a data room and what needs to be in there. And you can start working towards that before you start hearing from the other side.
Yeah. And there's some accounting firms, some consultants offer what's known as pre-diligence
exactly.
consulting. So you can also engage a firm to do pre-diligence for you to fill out your data room before you even go to market. So, but all great advice, but it's still challenging. Was there any slippage from the LOI to the final deal?
Yeah, you know what to ask, huh? So have you ever heard of networking capital before?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Explain it for us.
Networking capital, let me put it to you. Let me just give you a really specific example. So the way this works is we were a company that charged we were a SaaS model. We were charging, annual fees, but we were expressing them monthly. So our accountants would take the revenue and say, spread it out over a 12-month period. The problem with that is that depending on, and not all of our customers signed up on the same day, of course, right? Hundreds of customers. There were actually a lot in July, but it doesn't matter. So what would happen is we would have this revenue spread out over 12 months, and a big chunk of it would actually, in fact, sort of become a liability, because what was happening is our accountants would say, well, yeah, you got this deal and you're getting paid for it, but you still have to do all the work associated with this remaining money. So what happens is you have a big number for net working capital. And I mean huge, millions of dollars that you need to come to terms with the other side, with the buying side, to say, how much of this are we going to count as like net working capital that will effectively change the purchase price? And so for us, we ended up at, I think it was like we were going to take 25% of our net working capital and recognize that as something that could come against the purchase price. So that took us down a little bit. I think we ended up being like 38 and 38.9 or something like that. But I'll tell you what, you want to introduce an explosive topic in any acquisition, because it always happens later too. It's going to happen late in the process once they've gotten deeper into your numbers. And they're going to say, well, actually, because of all this net working capital, we are going to, and we're going to recognize 75% of it. So we're going to take $5 million off the price. Like, holy shit, you want to go atomic. Like everybody freaks out. And that was actually one of those situations where we were really happy to have Gal. Because if the lawyers are left to that, and the accountants, they'll fight to the death and it'll cost a ton of money. You need like a release valve for some of those really tough ones. And Gal was our guy in that case. We could have the discussion with him and just get it all sorted out, and then go back to the lawyers and say, hey, this is what we're doing. So,
Nice. Yeah. Working capital, I've often described it as the second most important number on a term sheet. Everybody focuses on the price, but how they're going to come to deal with the working capital is also important.
Yeah, of course.
And to be clear, in your case, you were charging these universities and organizations up front for their 12 months worth of service. So you received the cash, and then your accountant then spread those payments or the revenue out over 12 months. That makes sense to me. And so there was this, you received this cash, but not necessarily delivered the services.
Correct.
Makes sense. But even if you're not in a SaaS company, if you're in a products company, there will be a working capital true up, and you want to make sure you're thinking about that in advance. What an amazing story. I am so grateful for you sharing it, all the ins and outs. I'm not sure Chris will be super happy, but that's okay. I'll buy him a case of beer and, be done with it. Are you up for a quick lightning round
Sure.
of questions that just require a short answer? I think we touched on it a little bit, but what was the slimiest trick that an acquirer tried to play on you, preying on your naivete in the process?
Asking the number was good, and they played right on Chris's naivete right away. So
yeah. Biggest mistake you made during the process, other than sharing your numbers. If you could have a mulligan to do the whole sale over again, what might you change or do differently?
I think at one point, there was a consideration if we would be paid out greater than 40, maybe like 42 or something. And then they kind of went off and had a discussion. And one day they just came back and it was like 40. And I was pretty surprised. And I wish I had pushed harder. I was just happy to get $40 million. So I was like, whatever. But it was like, I think maybe there might have been more there. And I worry that I left that out by accident. I just sort of accepted it that whatever, that's fine.
Interesting. Yeah. What was the low point? I've heard selling is like this roller coaster emotional. What was your low emotional point in this process?
Oh, wow. Very vividly, it is after we actually sold our business, and then 10 months later, it was sold again to Motorola Solutions. So Motorola Solutions came in and bought Rave, and which obviously included us. And so then we were done, and Chris and I just didn't have it in us to do like another big sales enablement project and bring the companies together and all that stuff, especially when it's just so much bigger. So we're down by the water near our office here on Lake Ontario, and it's done. We're officially not employees anymore. All the payouts are complete. We had a big party with our staff. That was over, and we just wept. We just wept. It was a combination of just, wow, I can't believe this is finally over. Because that was just a big sprint for a long time from due diligence to bringing them together to the end. And I also think, though, it was a lot of insecurity. Like, who are we? Like, what are you now? Right. And I still have moments where I struggle with this question. I mean, the podcast helps and the book helps, too. But it's kind of like, who are you? If you just invest so much of your life in this. So it's really challenging.
Mm-hmm. What was the emotional high?
I have two, if I can offer two.
Sure.
The first one is when we actually got the money in our bank accounts. I'm sure most entrepreneurs would say this because that's what you're kind of pushing towards, right? I remember I was at the pediatrician. My daughter was fine. It was just a normal checkup, but I was there and I just looked at my phone and I was like, whoa, incoming deposit. So that was pretty sweet. The second thing was when we were internal at Rave, I knew, and so did the rest of the executive team knew that we were pushing for this Motorola acquisition, which meant that we had to hit certain sales targets. And AppArmor, as a segment of Rave, surpassed its sales target. So for me, that was wildly, wildly satisfying because a lot of what I was doing was training their people and ours in this new ecosystem.
That's awesome. How did you get prepared? You've already been super generous. Plug and built to sell. I appreciate that. but what else did you kind of draw on? What other resources could you point our listeners to that would help them get prepared to go through an exit?
Yeah, I think. Obviously your book is a great one. Easy peasy right there. I think there are different books on the subject too. I mean, I'm kind of a business book sort of fanatic, and so I've read tons of stuff. Even when I was working at the major telecom, I used to have a big commute and it was on the subway. And so I would read probably a business book a week. So there's tons of content out there that can give you interesting perspectives on like the psychology and then like which I would put you more in sort of like the mechanical, like things to have for an acquisition. I'd consider that. And then I would listen to people that have sold. And that's what we're doing here today, obviously. But in your interview with Seth Godin, which was fantastic. What I thought was really interesting about him is how he sort of regrets his first sale. He was very much like, I wish somebody had told me how I would feel. And I know he's got a pretty high emotional intelligence, but it was really interesting to just hear that take. And so I guess that's there's two kinds of preparation. There's like literally functionally, do I have the pieces, the spreadsheet's ready, that kind of stuff. Though the other side though is mentally prepare yourself for what's about to happen. Because it is a huge change to your life.
Yeah. And Seth did an amazing job describing that emotional ebb and the loss of meaning. Chip Connolly also, who I interviewed 3 or 4 months ago, did a wonderful job of talking about that. He's the guy who started the Modern Elders Academy. I'm not sure if you've heard of Chip, but he did a good job of describing some of the things that folks can do to sort of get out of that in between period where you're not sure who you are and what you're doing now after this big exit.
Yeah, it's a documented phenomenon. It is a thing. Like you will lose a sense of identity, and it is very jarring when that happens to anyone at any point. And the other flip side of this is the sympathy that people have for you is pretty darn low.
0. Let me get out the world's smallest violin.
Yeah, I literally write that line in our book. I have like, cue the world's smallest violin.
Really?
Yeah.
Two quick questions. What trophy did you buy yourself? Tell me you bought yourself something to commemorate the win.
I didn't really. Okay, so I did buy a new car.
Okay. What'd you get?
It's a nice SUV. Okay, it's a BMW SUV. So I was very happy with that. But that's not like a Ferrari or like anything like really exciting.
Hey.
But I
keep
think
the kids safe. What else did you buy?
What my biggest thing I think that was really the trophy for me was after we were done, so April of 2023, I went on a 6-week vacation with my wife and daughter, which is a lot, by the way, when you have a 1.5-year-old kid.
Sure, this is a trophy, or
yeah, I know. This is what some people have said to me. This is like torture.
Yeah, exactly.
We went for 6 weeks through Europe, and it was amazing. And the ongoing trophy is that I get to spend so much more time with her and with my wife, and that's actually really, really fulfilling. And I do, if I have just one extra second,
sure,
I got this out for you. So when Rave was acquired by Motorola, after it was done, they actually sent a trophy to everybody involved in it.
Oh,
okay.
God. It's a real trophy.
Yeah. So this, it says $560 million. That's how much Rave was purchased for by Motorola. And I love this because I know you're Canadian too, but this is Paul Revere. And it's 1 if by land, 2 if by sea, because they were in Boston. Okay. And I'm like, wait a minute, but we are the British. Anyway,
if you're not watching on YouTube, David's holding up a commemorative. It's really a trophy. It's to commemorate the Rave sale or acquisition by Motorola. So that's awesome. Last question, and I don't usually ask this, but I'm just really curious. You're obviously a young guy and young family, and we're recording this at a time where cryptocurrency is getting a lot of attention. And, people are talking about inflation and, a possible, loss of power of fiat currencies. And I'm not a crypto guy in any way, shape, or form, but it's hard not to listen to all of the kind of stuff about crypto and potentially the erosion of value of sort of regular currencies. How are you thinking about investing the windfall for the long term? Where are you putting the money? What are you doing?
That's a great question. Just starting that off, I'll just say I'm not too concerned about crypto. And I'll tell you why. Now that there's like an ETF that you can buy of crypto, it feels like it's like making its way more in a kind of mainstream functional, maybe you can manage. I am by far not at all an expert on cryptocurrency, but that's just my hot take, for this today. In terms of investment, I'm not super high risk when it comes to this. I do have some investments in some cases in like companies as like an angel investor, like really early on. I don't do a ton of that though, because it scares the hell out of me. And I know the stats. So I do some of that. I do have a lot in the market and in funds, ETFs that are dividend paying. And that is effectively the money that we live on. And then after that, like I own my house and all that kind of stuff. So otherwise things are very comfortable.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing
Yeah.
with me on that. And you have a new book coming out, which I'm excited to get my hands on. It's coming out in September, I think, right?
October, actually.
October.
Pre-orders start September.
What's the name of the book?
Startup Different. So we're very consistent across the board. Startup Different is the Startup Different podcast is the podcast. Startup Different, the book is the book. And it's going to come out October 1st, pre-orders starting Labor Day. And you'll be able to find it, on Amazon or your online retailer of choice. Till then, obviously following us on social, Startup Different, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever. If you're on social, we're probably there. So track us down, and it'd be great to have you following the progress of our book release. So
yeah, I can't wait to get my hands on it. And we'll put all of Dave and Chris's coordinates, LinkedIn connections, all the social connections in the show notes at builttosell.com. Dave, it was a real pleasure. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much. I had a wonderful time.